The storm hit the prairie like a freight train that November evening, turning the endless grassland into a wall of ice and wind. Through the blinding snow, a figure stumbled forward, a young woman, heavily pregnant, her thin coat soaked through to the bone. She'd been walking for hours since the bus left her at that crossroads, promising herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't give up. But now her legs were failing, and the darkness was closing in. That's when she saw it, a single light flickering through the storm, coming from an old cabin nestled against the hillside. What would make a man who'd sworn off the world open his door to a stranger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered door stood between Sarah and salvation, its oak surface scarred by decades of prairie storms. She raised her fist to knock, but her strength failed her. The wind screamed across the empty landscape, driving needles of ice into her. Exposed skin. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed against the doorframe, one hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. Inside the cabin, Thomas McKays sat before the dying fire, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The storm reminded him of another night, 3 years past, when the wind had howled just like this. He'd learned to live with ghosts, but storms always brought them closer. The soft thud against his door made him freeze. No one came out here, especially not in weather like this. He waited, listening. When he heard nothing more, he might have dismissed it as wind-blown debris, but something, instinct perhaps, or divine intervention, made him rise from his chair. The door protested as he pulled it open, hinges groaning against the wind's force. What he found there stopped his heart. A young woman, unconscious, covered in snow, and unmistakably pregnant. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, dropping to his knees. Beside her, his fingers found her neck, searching for a pulse. There, weak but steady, her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, and ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. For a moment he hesitated. 3 years of self-imposed isolation had built walls around his heart for good reason. The last pregnant woman he'd tried to help, he shook his head violently. This wasn't the time for memories. Thomas slipped his arms beneath her, grunting as he lifted her slight frame. She weighed less than she should, even accounting for her condition. How long had she been walking in this storm? Where had she come from? The nearest town was 15 miles away. He kicked the door shut behind them and carried her to the couch near the fireplace. Her clothes were soaked through. She'd freeze if he didn't act quickly. With practiced efficiency born from years of ranch life, he grabbed blankets from the cedar chest, then paused. Her wet clothes needed to come off, but the propriety of undressing an unconscious woman, especially a pregnant one. "Damn it all," he growled, deciding her life mattered more than social niceties. He worked quickly, professionally, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while he peeled away the frozen layers. Her thin coat might as well have been paper, against the storm. Underneath, her dress was threadbare, mended multiple times with different colored threads. He wrapped her in the thick wool blankets, then built up the fire until it roared with life-giving heat. From the kitchen, he fetched towels to dry her hair, noticing how her dark strands held hints of auburn in the firelight. She stirred slightly. As he worked, a soft moan escaping her lips. "Please," she whispered, though her eyes remained closed. "My baby, you're safe," Thomas found himself saying, his voice rusty from disuse. "Both of you." He settled into his armchair to wait, watching her face for signs of improvement. Color slowly returned to her cheeks, and her breathing deepened. She was young, early 20s at most, with delicate features that spoke of hardship, despite her youth. Her hands, when they emerged from the blankets, bore calluses that suggested hard work. An hour passed before she finally opened her eyes. They were green, like spring grass after rain, and filled with confusion that quickly shifted to alarm. "Where?" She tried to sit up, then gasped as the room spun. "Easy," Thomas said, holding up a hand. "You're safe. Found you collapsed outside my door." Her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the sparse but clean surroundings, the mounted deer head on the wall, the rifle above the mantel. When her eyes returned to him, they held a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to. The storm came up so fast, and the bus driver said there was a town nearby, but I must have gotten turned around. Nearest town's 15 miles east. You're lucky you found this place." He rose from his chair, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "Name's Thomas McKay. This is my ranch." "Sarah," she offered after a pause. "Sarah Chen." He noted she didn't offer a last name initially, then caught herself. Running from something, most likely. Not his business. "You hungry?" "Got some stew on the stove." Her stomach answered before she could, growling loudly. A blush crept across her cheeks. Yes, thank you." Thomas ladled the beef stew into a bowl, cut a thick slice of bread, and brought it to her on a tray. She struggled to sit up, wincing slightly. "When's the baby due?" he asked, setting the tray across her lap. 6 weeks, maybe 7. She took a small bite, then another larger one as hunger overtook caution. The doctor wasn't entirely sure. 6 weeks. In this weather, in her condition, she shouldn't be traveling at all. Again, not his business. He returned to his chair, picked up his whiskey, then set it down untasted. "The storm's not letting up tonight," he said. "Radio says it might last through tomorrow. You can stay until it passes. I couldn't impose, not an imposition, can't send you back out in this weather." His tone brooked no argument. Sarah nodded slowly, focusing on her food. The silence stretched between them. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. The fire crackled and wind rattled the windows. "Your clothes should be dry by morning," Thomas offered. "There's a spare room down the hall. He stopped himself. "It's clean. Has its own lock if that makes you feel safer." "Why would you help me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Thomas considered the question, staring into the fire. Why, indeed? Maybe because turning away a pregnant woman in a storm would make him a monster. Maybe because the universe was testing him. Or maybe because sometimes doing the right thing didn't need a reason. "Because it's the decent thing to do," he said finally. "Finish your food. You need the strength." Sarah ate in silence after that, sneaking glances at her taciturn host. He was older than her by maybe 15 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, but they'd been gentle when he'd brought her food. There was a sadness about him, a weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. When she finished eating, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Thomas noticed her drooping eyelids. "Come on," he said, standing. "Let's get you to bed." He led her down a short hallway to a small room. It was simple but clean, with a quilted bedspread and curtains that would block the morning sun. On the dresser sat a ceramic horse, painted in delicate blues and whites. "Bathrooms across the hall," he said. "There's extra blankets in the closet. If you need them. I'll be up at dawn to check the animals, but you sleep as long as you need." "Thank you," Sarah said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't think about that," Thomas cut her off, but not unkindly. "Just rest. Things always look better in the morning." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I won't take offense." After he left, Sarah did lock the door, though she suspected she'd never been safer in her life. She crawled into the bed, marveling at the clean sheets and warm blankets. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the reassuring movement within. "We're okay, little one," she whispered. "We're okay." Down the hall, Thomas banked the fire and secured the cabin for the night. He paused outside the spare room, listening to make sure his unexpected guest was settled. Then he retreated to his own room, where he lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and trying not to think about another pregnant woman who'd needed his help on a night like this. But that was the past, and the past was buried under 3 years of Wyoming snow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, He'd done what needed doing. That would have to be enough. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting patterns on the quilted bedspread. The events of the previous night rushed back. The storm, the collapse, the gruff rancher who'd saved her life. She dressed quickly in her now dry clothes, wincing at their worn state. In the small mirror above the dresser, she tried to tame her tangled hair, then gave up. Vanity seemed foolish after nearly freezing to death. The hallway was quiet, but sounds of movement came from the kitchen. She padded softly toward them, pausing in the doorway to observe her host. Thomas stood at the stove, his movements efficient as he flipped eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He'd changed into fresh clothes, worn jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Without the shadows of night obscuring his features, she could see him more clearly, weather-beaten but handsome in a rugged way, with capable hands and broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's on the table. Help yourself." Sarah poured a cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I should be going. I've imposed enough." "Storm's not done yet." He gestured toward the window with his spatula. "Radio says another front's coming through. Roads are impassable." She looked outside and her heart sank. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, and the wind still whipped it into dancing spirals. The landscape was beautiful but hostile, stretching endlessly in every direction. "Sit," Thomas said, placing a loaded plate on the table. "Eat." The eggs were perfect, the bacon crispy, the toast golden. Sarah ate with more appetite than she'd had in weeks. Morning sickness had plagued her first months. But now, in her third trimester, she was constantly hungry. Thomas joined her with his own plate, eating in silence. She noticed his gaze flick to her belly, then away, a shadow crossing his features. "When you're done, I need to check the livestock," he said. "Storm like this, they need extra feed. You can stay inside where it's warm." "I could help," Sarah offered. "I'm stronger than I look." "In your condition?" His tone was incredulous. "Not a chance. I'm pregnant, not dying." The words came out sharper than intended. "Sorry, I'm used to people treating me like I'm made of glass." "People like the father?" The question hung between them. Sarah's jaw tightened. "He made his position clear when I told him. Said it wasn't his problem." Thomas grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. His loss. They finished breakfast in silence. When Thomas rose to clear the dishes, Sarah beat him to it. "Least I can do," she insisted, already running water in the sink. While she washed dishes, Thomas shrugged into a heavy coat and wrapped a scarf around his neck. "I'll be back in an hour or so. Make yourself comfortable. There's books on the shelf if you get bored." After he left, Sarah explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was larger than it had seemed last night, with the main room that served as living and dining area, the kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom that had been added on sometime in the past decade, judging by the newer construction. The bookshelf drew her attention. Mostly practical titles, veterinary guides, almanacs, repair manuals, but also some fiction, Louis L'Amour westerns, a few mysteries and, surprisingly, a collection of poetry. She pulled out a worn copy of Robert Frost and settled into the armchair by the fire, but the books on the shelf weren't what caught her eye. It was what sat on the mantel above the fireplace, a photograph turned face down, as if someone couldn't bear to look at it, but couldn't bring themselves to put it away entirely. Curiosity warred with respect for privacy. She lasted all of 10 minutes before carefully reaching for the frame. The photograph showed Thomas, younger and smiling broadly, with his arm around a pretty blonde woman. She was obviously pregnant, one hand resting on her rounded belly while she leaned into Thomas's embrace. They looked radiantly happy, standing in front of what must be this very cabin, though it looked newer in the photo. "You always were too curious for your own good." Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the frame. Thomas stood in the doorway, snow still clinging to his boots. His expression was unreadable, but tension radiated from every line of his body. "I'm sorry." she said quickly, setting the photo back face down. I shouldn't have. 3 years ago, he said, cutting off her apology. Margaret, Maggie, she was 8 months along when a storm hit, worse than this one, couldn't get to town. I tried to. The baby came too fast. Lost them both. The words fell like stones into still water. Sarah sank into the chair, one hand unconsciously moving to her own belly. Thomas, Don't. He hung up his coat with deliberate movements. It's done. Can't change it. But you understand now why I live out here alone. Is that why you helped me? Because of her? He considered the question, then shook his head. Helped you because it was right. That's all. But Sarah could see the lie in his eyes. He'd helped her because he couldn't not help her. Because turning away a pregnant woman in a storm would have been like losing Maggie all over again. I'll leave as soon as the storm breaks, she said softly. I promise. Where will you go? The question she'd been avoiding. West. California, maybe. Heard there's work in the valleys, even for someone like me. Someone like you. Single, pregnant, no family. She lifted her chin defiantly. I'll make it work, always have. Thomas studied her for a long moment. You got family somewhere? People looking for you? My parents died when I was 16. Car accident, been on my own since then. The father, he might come looking. A bitter laugh escaped her. David? No, he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with this baby. Or me. Gave me $200 and told me to take care of it. When I refused, he said I was on my own. Bastard, Thomas muttered. I thought he loved me, Sarah admitted, surprising herself with the confession. Thought we were building something. Turns out I was just convenient until I became inconvenient. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Thomas added another log to the fire, then settled into his chair across from her. California's no place for a woman alone with a baby, he said finally. Cities are expensive. Farm work's hard. You thought about what you'll do when the baby comes? I'll figure it out. The words sounded hollow, even to her ears. I always do. Pride's a cold comfort when you're hungry. What would you have me do? The question burst out of her. Beg? Find another man to take care of me? I won't be dependent on anyone again. Nothing wrong with accepting help when you need it. Says the man living alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. That earned her a slight smile, the first she'd seen from him. Touché. The tension eased slightly. Sarah picked up the poetry book she'd abandoned. You read Frost. Maggie did. Used to read aloud in the evenings. He paused. Haven't touched those books in 3 years. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, Sarah quoted softly. But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, Thomas finished. She loved that one. They sat quietly for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the prairie, but inside, the cabin felt like a small pocket of safety in a harsh world. You can stay until the road's clear, Thomas said eventually. No strings, just until you can travel safely. I'll earn my keep, Sarah insisted. I can cook, clean, help with bookkeeping if you need it. I'm good with numbers. We'll see. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it wasn't rejection either. Sarah would take what she could get. She'd learned not to expect much from life, but sometimes, like last night when she'd seen that flickering lantern through the storm, grace appeared when you needed it most. The rocking chair in the corner caught her eye, covered with a dust sheet. Another remnant of the life Thomas had lost. She wondered if he'd built it himself, if Maggie had sat in it planning their future while their baby grew inside her. Some ghosts, Sarah thought, were harder to live with than others, but perhaps that's what had saved her. Thomas's inability to let go of his own ghosts had made him unable to turn away from hers. The baby shifted inside her, a flutter of movement that never failed to fill her with wonder and terror in equal measure. 6 weeks, maybe 7, and she'd be holding this little life in her arms. The thought should have frightened her more than the storm, but for now she was warm and fed and safe. Tomorrow's fears could wait. Today she would rest in this unexpected Haven, and try not to think about the rocking chair in the corner or the man across from her who carried his grief like a physical weight. Some storms, after all, took longer to pass than others. The storm raged for 3 more days. By the second day, Sarah had established herself as more than a temporary guest. She took over the kitchen, transforming Thomas's utilitarian meals into something resembling home cooking. The change was subtle, but profound. Herbs she'd found dried in the back of a cupboard, a tablecloth discovered in the linen closet, place settings arranged with care. Thomas watched her work with a mixture of gratitude and unease. The cabin hadn't seen such domestic attention since Maggie, and every small touch felt like both a gift and a betrayal. "You don't have to do all this," he said as she pulled a golden brown cornbread from the oven. "I told you I'd earn my keep." She set the pan on a cooling rack, then turned to stir the pot of chili simmering on the stove. Besides, cooking for 2 is more satisfying than cooking for 1. He couldn't argue with that. His own meals had become perfunctory affairs, fuel rather than pleasure. But watching Sarah move around his kitchen with growing confidence stirred something he'd thought buried. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Restaurant work mostly. Started washing dishes at 16 after my parents died. Worked my way up to prep cook, then line cook." She tasted the chili, added more cumin. "That's how I met David. He was the owner's son, used to come in during the dinner rush, wearing his expensive suits, acting like he owned the place, which I guess he would have, eventually. But not with you in the picture." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "A prep cook who'd aged, out of foster care. His parents made it clear I wasn't daughter-in-law material. David said it didn't matter, that he loved me despite their objections. I was young enough to believe him." She ladled chili into bowls while Thomas sliced the cornbread. They'd developed an easy rhythm over the past days, moving around each other in the small space without collision. "What about you?" Sarah asked as they sat down to eat. "How'd you meet Maggie?" Thomas rarely talked about his late wife, but something about Sarah's quiet presence made the words come easier. "County fair. She was showing sheep. I was there to buy cattle. Watched her handle a stubborn ram like it was nothing. All 5'2", of her bossing around an animal twice her weight." A smile ghosted across his face. "Asked her to dance that night at the fair pavilion. 2 years later, we were married. She was from around here? Nebraska originally. Farm girl through and through. Knew the life, didn't romanticize it. That's what made it work. She understood the long hours, the uncertainty, the isolation." Sarah absorbed this information, building a picture of the woman whose ghost haunted every corner of the cabin. "The rocking chair, did you make it?" Thomas's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "How did you—" He followed her gaze to the corner where the dust-covered chair sat. "Yeah. Started it when she told me about the baby. Spent months on it wanting it perfect. She never got to use it. The weight of unfinished dreams hung in the air." Sarah understood that particular ache, the future you'd planned that would never come to pass. "I had a crib picked out," she offered quietly. "Nothing fancy, just a simple white one from the second-hand store. Put it on layaway, paying $5 a week. When David gave me that money to take care of it, my first thought was that I could pay off the crib. Stupid, right? Not stupid, hopeful. Same difference sometimes." They finished their meal in companionable silence. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, though snow still fell steadily. The radio weather report promised clearing by tomorrow, maybe the day after. As Sarah cleared the dishes, she stumbled, slightly, catching herself against the counter. "You okay?" "Fine, just the baby shifting. Gets crowded in there sometimes." She rubbed her lower back, wincing. "Sit down. I'll handle the dishes." "I'm not an invalid." "Sit." His tone brooked. No argument. "You cooked, I'll clean. Fair's fair." She sank into the armchair gratefully, watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced, a man used to taking care of himself, but she could see the ghost of old patterns, the way he automatically set 2 mugs by the coffee pot, then put one back. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. Might not answer, but you can ask. Why stay here? After what happened, why not sell the ranch, start over somewhere else? Thomas dried the last dish slowly, considering. Thought about it. Had offers for the land. Developers wanting to build vacation homes for city folks. But this place, he gestured vaguely at the walls around them. My grandfather built this cabin. My father was born in that back bedroom. Maggie's buried on the hill overlooking the valley, next to my parents. Leaving would feel like abandoning them, so you abandoned the world instead. The observation stung because it was true. Seemed easier, hurt less. Does it? Hurt less? He turned to face her fully. Some days. Others, the silence is so loud I can hardly stand it. But by then, I'd been alone so long I'd forgotten how to be around people. You're doing okay now. You're not exactly people, He searched for words. You're a storm refugee, temporary. That makes it different. Sarah felt the sting of that classification, but understood the need for it. They were both protecting themselves in their own ways. The baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp. Thomas was beside her in an instant, concern creasing his features. Just a soccer player, she assured him, hand on her belly. Particularly active today. His hand hovered uncertainly before dropping to his side. Maggie used to say the same thing, said the baby was doing gymnastics in there. Do you want to feel? The offer surprised them both. The movement, I mean, if you want. Thomas hesitated so long she thought he'd refuse. Then slowly, he knelt beside the chair and placed one work-roughened hand on her belly. They waited, barely breathing, until the baby obliged with a rolling movement. His face transformed, wonder and pain warring in his expression. Strong little one. That's what the doctor said. Good heartbeat, good size. Everything's fine except for the minor detail of me being alone and broke. Thomas pulled his hand back, the moment broken. You're not alone right now. Right now, she agreed. But the storm's ending. He stood, retreating to safe distance. We'll deal with that when we need to. Still got tonight, probably tomorrow. No point borrowing trouble. Sarah wanted to point out that trouble had a way of coming whether you borrowed it or not. But she held her tongue. She'd learned to live day by day, hour by hour when necessary. If Thomas needed to pretend this was just about weather, she could give him that fiction. As evening drew in, they settled into what was becoming routine. Thomas read a farming journal while Sarah continued through the poetry collection. The fire crackled, the old cabin creaked and settled, and for a few hours they could pretend this was normal. Just two people sharing space and warmth while winter raged outside. But pretense only stretched so far. Tomorrow or the next day, the roads would clear, decisions would have to be made. Sarah would have to leave this unexpected sanctuary and face the uncertain future waiting beyond the storm. For tonight, though, she was content to sit by the fire, feel her baby move, and listen to the quiet sounds of Thomas turning pages. Some stories, she thought, were written in the spaces between words, in the careful distance maintained, and the kindnesses offered, despite old wounds. The mantel clock ticked steadily, marking time that felt both precious and borrowed. In 6 weeks, maybe 7, everything would change again. But for now, in this lamplit cabin while snow fell softly outside, 2 damaged souls had found a moment's peace in each other's company. It wasn't love, it wasn't even friendship exactly, but it was something. A recognition, perhaps, that some storms were easier to weather when you weren't alone. Sarah found the blanket by accident. She'd been searching for extra bedding in the hall closet when her hand touched something soft, wrapped in tissue paper and tucked far in the back. She knew she shouldn't look, but curiosity won. It was a baby blanket, hand-quilted in soft yellows and greens with tiny embroidered ducks marching along the border. The stitching was meticulous, each duck unique, clearly a labor of love. In the corner, embroidered in pale blue thread, were the initials TM and a date 3 years past. Maggie made that. Sarah nearly dropped the blanket, spinning to find Thomas in the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the small quilt. "I'm sorry," she began, but he held up a hand. "She started it the day we found out about the baby. Worked on it every evening, said every stitch was a prayer for our child." He reached past her, taking the blanket with careful hands. "Never got to finish the last corner. See?" He showed her where the pattern ended abruptly, several ducks outlined, but never completed. The sight of that unfinished work hit Sarah harder than any photograph could have. "She sounds wonderful," Sarah said softly. She was. Thomas smoothed the blanket, then surprised them both by holding it out to Sarah. "You should have it." "I couldn't. It's been sitting in that closet for 3 years. Maggie would hate that. She made things to be used, not hidden away." His voice roughened. "Your little one needs a blanket. This one's been waiting long enough." Sarah accepted the quilt with trembling hands. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just use it. Give it the life it was meant to have." They stood in the narrow hallway, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Then Thomas cleared his throat and stepped back. "Storm's breaking. Thought you might want to see the sunset. Sometimes after a big storm, the sky puts on quite a show." He was right. They bundled up and stepped onto the front porch, where the world had been transformed. Fresh snow blanketed. Everything in pristine white, turning the harsh landscape into something from a fairy tale. The setting sun painted the clouds in shades of rose and gold, the light reflecting off the snow in 1,000 tiny sparkles. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Maggie loved these moments. Said they were God's way of apologizing for the storm. They stood side by side, watching the light show. Sarah clutched the blanket to her chest, feeling the weight of the gift she'd been given. Not just the quilt, but the trust it represented. "Tell me about her," she said. "Not about how she died. Tell me how she lived." Thomas leaned against the porch rail, his eyes distant. "She sang while she worked, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but that never stopped her. She'd be out feeding chickens, belting out hymns like she was on stage at the Grand Ole Opry." Sarah smiled at the image. "She couldn't cook worth a damn when we first married," he continued. "Burned everything. I ate a lot of charcoal that first year, but she kept trying, kept experimenting. By our 2nd anniversary, she was making meals that could have won county fair ribbons." "What was her favorite thing to make?" "Peach pie. She'd gun peaches every summer, saved them specially for pies. Made one every Sunday during winter, said it was like keeping summer alive in the cold months." The sun sank lower, the colors deepening. Sarah shivered, and Thomas noticed. "We should go in. Can't have you catching cold." Inside, the cabin felt even warmer after the bite of winter air. Thomas built up the fire while Sarah made hot chocolate from a mix she'd found in the pantry. "Haven't had cocoa in years," Thomas admitted, accepting a mug. "Some things are meant to be shared," Sarah said, settling into what she'd come to think of as her chair. The baby blanket lay across her lap, and she traced the embroidered ducks with one finger. "She would have liked you," Thomas said suddenly. "Maggie, I mean. She had a soft spot for strays. Is that what I am? A stray? Aren't we all in one way or another?" They drank their cocoa in comfortable silence. The barriers between them had shifted, not fallen entirely, but rearranged into something less forbidding. Sarah understood she'd been given entry into a sacred space, not just the cabin, but the memories it held. "I've been thinking," Thomas said eventually. "The roads will be clear tomorrow, day after at most. Town's doctor should check you over, make sure everything's okay after your time in the storm." Reality crept back in. "I suppose you're right. I could drive you. Trucks. Got 4-wheel drive. Handles these roads well enough." "And after that?" He didn't answer immediately. "There's a women's shelter in town. Church runs it. Good people. They'd help you get on your feet." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. Of course this couldn't last. She'd known that from the beginning. Or, she looked up, hope flaring despite herself. "Ranch needs a lot of work, more than I can handle alone, truth be told. Been letting things slide these past years. Could use someone who's good with numbers, help get the books in order. Wouldn't pay much, but there's room and board." "Are you offering me a job?" "Offering you time," he corrected. Time to figure out your next move without worrying about shelter. Time to have that baby safely. Time to decide what comes after. Sarah's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Thomas stared into his cocoa as if it held answers. Maybe because I'm tired of this place feeling like a tomb. Maybe because you cook better than I do. Maybe because... He trailed off, then met her eyes. Maybe because Maggie would have kicked my ass for turning away someone who needed help. I don't want your pity. Good, because I'm not offering it. This would be a business arrangement. You work, you get room and board and a small wage, nothing more. But they both knew it was already more. It was a chance, a lifeline, a possibility. Neither had expected. I don't know anything about ranching, Sarah warned. You can learn. You're smart, you work hard, and you don't complain. That's more than I can say for most hired help I've had. Sarah looked down at the blanket in her lap, at those carefully embroidered ducks that would finally fulfill their purpose. Sometimes, she thought, grace came in unexpected packages. A gruff rancher with a broken heart, a gifted blanket, a job offer that was really an offer of hope. Okay, she said simply. Okay, Thomas nodded, trying to look businesslike and failing entirely. For the first time since she'd arrived, he smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his face, showing her glimpses of the man he'd been before grief rewrote his story. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and the first stars appeared. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. Inside the cabin, two people who'd thought their stories were over began to tentatively write new chapters. The baby moved under Sarah's hand, under Maggie's blanket, and she thought about the strange circles life drew, how loss could lead to finding, how storms could deliver you exactly where you needed to be. Thank you, she said, meaning more than just the job. Thank you, he replied, meaning more than just the help. The fire crackled, the wind whispered, and somewhere in the space between words, healing began. The morning dawned crystal clear, the storm finally spent. Thomas was up before sunrise, checking on livestock that had weathered the blizzard. By the time Sarah emerged from her room, he'd already fed the horses and was working on fixing a fence section damaged by the wind. Roads look passable, he said when he came in for breakfast. We should head to town, get you checked by Doc Morrison. Sarah nodded, though the thought of leaving the cabin's safety made her anxious. She'd grown comfortable here, perhaps too comfortable. The drive to town took 40 minutes over roads still rough with snow. Thomas's truck handled them easily, but Sarah gripped the door handle whenever they slid. The baby seemed to sense her tension, moving restlessly. Riverside was exactly what she'd expected. A small ranching town with one main street, a handful of businesses, and everyone knowing everyone else's business. Heads turned as Thomas's truck passed. She could imagine the gossip already starting. Dr. Morrison's clinic occupied a converted house near the town center. The elderly doctor examined Sarah thoroughly, listening to the baby's heartbeat and checking her blood pressure. Everything looks good, he announced. Baby's strong, good position. You're a bit underweight, but nothing serious. When's your due date? 6 weeks, give or take. And you're staying where? Sarah glanced at Thomas, who stood by the window, carefully not listening. Mr. McKays offered me work at his ranch, room and board included. The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing beyond, good, you shouldn't be traveling in your condition. Make sure you come see me every 2 weeks until delivery, sooner if anything feels wrong. After the clinic, Thomas drove to the general store. Need supplies, he said. You should pick up anything you need. Sarah followed him through the store, aware of the stares and whispers. Thomas seemed oblivious, filling his cart with practical items, flour, coffee, canned goods. She added a few personal necessities, wincing at the prices. Put it on my account, Thomas told the clerk, ignoring Sarah's protest. Thomas McKay, the clerk, her name tag read Mabel, said with poorly concealed curiosity. Haven't seen you in town for months. And who's this? Sarah Chen. She's helping with the books and house management. Is that so? Mabel's eyes fixed on Sarah's belly. "Welcome to Riverside, dear. When are you due?" "6 weeks." "How wonderful. And where's Mr. Chen?" "There isn't one," Sarah said quietly, lifting her chin. Mabel's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on sympathy mixed with judgment. "I see. Well, how fortunate you found work with Thomas." They escaped as quickly as possible, loading supplies into the truck. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger. "That's going to be all over town by dinner," Thomas said as they drove away. "I'm sorry. I know how small towns are about reputation. I stopped caring what this town thinks 3 years ago." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Let them talk." Back at the ranch, they unloaded in silence. Sarah noticed a ledger on the kitchen table and seized on it as a distraction. "Are these your accounts?" Thomas grimaced. "Such as they are. Never been much for bookkeeping." She opened the ledger, wincing at the haphazard entries. "May I? Be my guest." Sarah spent the afternoon making sense of his financial records. It was worse than she'd expected, not because he was broke, but because his lackadaisical record-keeping meant he had no clear picture of the ranch's status. "You haven't balanced this in 2 years, she said, looking up from columns of figures. "Seem pointless. Money comes in from cattle sales, goes out for expenses. Long as there's enough to cover bills, rest doesn't matter. You're losing money you don't even know about. Look here, you've been double paying for feed delivery, and this invoice for veterinary services is inflated by at least 30%. Thomas leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. "You can tell that from just looking? Restaurant work teaches you to spot vendor scams. Plus, I've always been good with numbers. Used to do the books for my last employer before." She trailed off. "Before David." "Yeah." She worked steadily, creating order from chaos. Thomas watched, occasionally answering questions about specific entries. As the afternoon wore on, a clearer picture emerged. "You're not in bad shape financially," Sarah concluded, "but you could be doing much better. A few adjustments to your purchasing, better tracking of expenses, maybe diversifying income sources." "You sound like Maggie. She always said I needed to run this place more like a business." Sarah closed the ledger carefully. "I can set up a proper system if you want. Nothing complicated, just something to track everything clearly. That's why I hired you." The word "hired" hung between them, a reminder that this was a business arrangement. Sarah appreciated the boundary, even as part of her wished for something less defined. That evening, she cooked while Thomas did repair work in the barn. The rhythm felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. When he came in for dinner, she had pot roast waiting, the kitchen warm and fragrant. "Smells like heaven," he said, washing up at the sink. They ate while discussing ranch business. Sarah had ideas, ways to cut costs, potential additional income streams. Thomas listened, asked questions, pushed back on some suggestions. It felt like a partnership, equal despite their different skills. "You could board horses," she suggested. "Town folks with horses but no land. The stable has room. More work than it's worth. Not if you charge right. I ran the numbers." "Of course you did." But he was smiling slightly, and Sarah realized she was starting to recognize his expressions, the subtle difference between irritation and amusement. After dinner, they sat by the fire going over her proposed changes. The baby kicked, and Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "You okay? Just restless?" "The baby, I mean, gets active in the evenings." Thomas hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about names?" "Some. Emily, if it's a girl after my mother. Haven't settled on a boy's name." "Emily's nice. Classic." They lapsed into comfortable silence. Sarah found herself stealing glances at him, this complicated man who'd opened his home to her. In the firelight, she could see both the hardness grief had carved into him and the gentleness underneath. "I should turn in," she said eventually. "Want to get an early start on those books tomorrow?" "Sarah," he stopped her at the hallway. "Today in town, what Mabel said, it's fine. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, unnamed but real. Then Thomas looked away, and the moment broke. "Good night, Thomas. Good night." In her room, Sarah spread Maggie's blanket over her bed and tried not to think about the warmth in Thomas's eyes or the way her heart had stuttered when he'd defended her. This was business, she reminded herself. Practical, safe, but as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help wondering if practical arrangements could grow into something more. If two broken people could build something whole together, time would tell. For now, she had work, shelter, and a fighting chance at a future. That was more than she'd had a week ago when she'd stumbled through a storm toward a flickering light. Sometimes she thought salvation came in unexpected forms. Sometimes it looked like ledger books and pot roast and a quiet man learning to care again. The emergency radio crackled to life during breakfast, its static-filled voice cutting through their morning routine. National Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for the following counties. Roads expected to be impassable. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, residents are advised to shelter in place. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. 2 to 3 weeks. Thomas adjusted the radio dial, trying to get better reception. Not unusual for February out here. Last year we were snowed in for a month. But I need to see Dr. Morrison in 2 weeks. If the roads don't clear, Doc can't get here anyway. He studied her with concern. You feeling okay? Any problems? No, everything's fine. It's just... She rubbed her expanding belly. Getting closer, you know, makes me nervous. The baby chose that moment to deliver a solid kick, visible even through her sweater. Thomas's eyes tracked the movement with wonder he couldn't quite hide. Active little one, he observed. Tell me about it. I swear this child never sleeps. Over the following days, they settled into deeper routines. The enforced isolation created an intimacy neither had expected. Sarah's presence had transformed the cabin, not just through her cooking and cleaning, but in smaller ways. A vase of dried wildflowers on the table, her sweater draped over a chair, the sound of her humming while she worked. Thomas found himself looking forward to their evening conversations by the fire. Sarah had a quick wit and sharp observations about life that made him remember what it was like to laugh. Really laugh, not just the polite chuckles he'd offered townspeople on his rare trips for supplies. You're different than you were that first night, Sarah said one evening, looking up from the account ledger she'd been updating. How so? Less frozen, like you're thawing out along with the weather. Weather's not thawing. We're buried under 6 feet of snow. You know what I mean. He did know. The numbness that had encased him for 3 years was cracking, letting in both warmth and pain. Sarah's presence was like spring arriving too early, welcome but dangerous. You're different too, he said, less scared. Still scared, just hiding it better. She closed the ledger. I've never done this before. The baby thing. What if I'm terrible at it? You won't be. How can you know that? Thomas considered his words carefully. Way you take care of everything here. Way you think ahead, plan for problems. That's what parenting is, thinking 3 steps ahead and trying to keep disaster at bay. Were you and Maggie planning for long? 5 years. She had 3 miscarriages before. He trailed off. Doctor said everything was fine with the last pregnancy, right up until it wasn't. Sarah reached across the space between their chairs, briefly touching his hand. I'm sorry. Not your fault. Not anyone's fault. Sometimes life just breaks. Wrong. They sat quietly listening to wind rattling the windows. The baby shifted, and Sarah winced, back hurting, like someone's driving railroad spikes into it. Without thinking, Thomas said, Maggie used to have me massage her back. Helped with the pain. The words hung in the air, loaded with implication. Sarah bit her lip, clearly weighing discomfort against propriety. I wouldn't want to impose... Not an imposition. Turn your chair around. She did, presenting her back to him. Thomas placed his hands carefully on her shoulders, feeling the tension knotted there. Lower, she directed. Right above the hips. He worked carefully, using the pressure points he remembered. Sarah's soft sighs of relief told him he was helping. The domesticity of the moment, him easing her pregnancy pains, stirred something deep and dangerous. Better? Much. Thank you. She turned back around, cheeks slightly flushed. You must miss having someone to take care of. Taking care of you, doesn't that count? That's different. I'm an employee. The word stung, though it shouldn't have. That's what they'd agreed on after all, business, practical. Right, he said, of course. But later that night, Thomas lay awake thinking about the way her hair had smelled like lavender soap, the small sounds of contentment she'd made as he'd worked the knots from her muscles. Dangerous thoughts for a man who'd sworn off feeling. Down the hall, Sarah was having her own sleepless night. The baby was restless, responding perhaps to her emotional turmoil. She pressed her hands to her belly, trying to soothe the movement. I know, little one, she whispered. I'm confused too. The morning brought more snow and a decision to tackle indoor projects. Thomas had been avoiding the back storage room for 3 years, but with Sarah's help, he finally opened the door. Baby furniture filled the space. A crib, changing table, rocking horse Thomas had started carving, everything covered in dust and memory. We should get these ready, Sarah said softly. I'll need them soon. Thomas's jaw tightened. You sure? Unless you want me to have the baby on the kitchen floor, yes. Her gentle humor eased the moment. Together they carried the furniture to the spare room, cleaning each piece carefully. Sarah didn't comment on the tears that tracked silently down Thomas's face as they assembled the crib. She just worked beside him, occasionally touching his arm in wordless support. By evening, a nursery had taken shape. Not elaborate, but functional, and waiting. The rocking chair from the living room had been moved in, Maggie's blanket draped over its arm. It's perfect, Sarah said, testing the chair's motion. Thank you for this, for all of it. Thomas stood in the doorway, seeing not what was, but what might have been. Then Sarah reached for his hand, tugging him into the room. This isn't about the past, she said gently. It's about the future. A different future than you planned, but still a future. I know, it's just hard. I know. She squeezed his hand. But maybe hard things are worth doing. He looked at her, then really looked. Saw the courage it took for her to trust again after being abandoned. Saw the grace she offered him daily, space to grieve while gently pulling him back to life. Saw the way she'd made his cold cabin into something resembling a home. Yeah, he said roughly. Maybe they are. The radio crackled again with updates. 3 weeks now, minimum. The outside world felt impossibly far away, but inside the cabin, with baby furniture assembled and dinner cooking on the stove, 2 people were building something neither had expected. Not love, not yet, but possibility. And for 2 hearts scarred by loss, possibility was its own kind of miracle. Sarah felt the baby settle, finally calm. Soon this little life would need the room they'd prepared, the blanket Maggie had sewn. The love both she and Thomas had thought themselves too broken to give, but broken things could mend. She was learning that, day by snow-buried day. Sometimes all it took was time, patience, and someone willing to hold the pieces while you figured out how they fit back together. The knock on the door came as a surprise. After 3 weeks of isolation, they'd grown accustomed to their private world. Thomas peered through the window, then quickly opened the door. Doc Morrison. Hell of a trek in this weather. The elderly. Doctor stomped snow from his boots, his worn medical bag in hand. Borrowed Jim Paulson's snowmobile. Figured I better check on my patient since she couldn't come to me. His shrewd eyes took in the domestic scene. Sarah at the stove, the smell of baking bread, the general air of comfortable cohabitation. Miss Chen, how are you feeling? Good. Really good. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious. The baby's been active, no problems. Let's make sure of that. Is there somewhere private we can talk? Thomas gestured toward the spare room. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He grabbed his coat and left, giving them privacy. Dr. Morrison's examination was thorough, his questions probing but professional. Weight's better, he noted. Color's good. Baby's position is perfect. You've been taking care of yourself. Thomas makes sure I eat properly. Won't let me skip meals. Thomas, is it? The doctor's tone was carefully neutral. Known him since he was born. Good man. Had a hard few years. Sarah pulled her sweater back down. He's been very kind. I delivered his wife's baby. Or tried. Two. Doc Morrison packed his stethoscope away. Cord wrapped around the neck. By the time Thomas got her to the road where I could meet them, it was too late. Lost them both. He told me. Did he tell you he nearly died himself that night? Carried Maggie 2 miles through a blizzard, hoping to reach help. They found him collapsed in a snowbank, still holding her. Sarah's throat tightened. No, he didn't mention that. Not surprised. Thomas never was one to talk about his pain, but I've watched him these 3 years, turning into a ghost himself. The doctor studied her carefully. You've brought life back to this place. I can see it. In the curtains. Smell it in the bread. More than that, I saw it in his eyes when he opened the door. It's just a business arrangement. I work, he provides room and board. Doc Morrison snorted. If you believe that, you're not as smart as you seem. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. He looks at me like I'm his second chance to save someone, Sarah corrected. That's not the same thing. Maybe. Maybe not. The doctor stood, joints creaking. Either way, you're good for each other. Just be careful. Careful of what? Hearts are tricky things. They don't always heal clean. Sometimes scar tissue makes them stronger. Sometimes it makes them fragile. He patted her shoulder. You're both carrying wounds. Make sure you don't wound each other worse in the healing. After he left, Sarah stood at the window watching him disappear into the white landscape on his snowmobile. Thomas emerged from the barn, intercepting the doctor before he could leave. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Doc Morrison's gestures, Thomas's nodding, the way both men glanced toward the house. When Thomas came back inside, his expression was thoughtful. Everything okay? With you and the baby? Perfect, according to Doc. He says, I'm thriving. Good. That's good. Sarah returned to her bread making, but she could feel Thomas watching her. What did he say to you, outside? Told me to take care of you. As if I wasn't already. And? Thomas hung up his coat slowly. Said I looked better than I have in years. Said the place felt alive again. Do you agree? He moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee. House smells like bread instead of dust. There's laughter instead of silence. So yeah, I guess it does feel more alive. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, he admitted. I got comfortable with the emptiness, safer that way. Sarah shaped the dough with practiced movements. Safety's overrated, says the woman who showed up half frozen on my doorstep. Exactly. I chose possible death over certain misery. Sometimes you have to take the risk. Thomas watched her work, noting the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way flour dusted her cheek. What if the risk is too big? She met his eyes directly. What if it's not? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility. Then the oven timer rang, breaking the spell. That evening, as had become their habit, they sat by the fire. But something had shifted. The doctor's visit had brought the outside world into their bubble, reminding them both that this situation was temporary. I've been thinking, Thomas said suddenly, about after the baby comes. Sarah's knitting needles, she'd taken up making tiny socks, paused. Oh, you'll need help. Newborns are, well, they're a lot, especially alone. I've managed alone before, not with a baby, not recovering from childbirth. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Stay, at least until spring really comes. Give yourself time to heal, figure out your next move without pressure. That's 3 more months, maybe 4. So that's a long time to have a crying baby in your house. Dirty diapers, sleepless nights, constant demands. You think I sleep well now? His smile was wry. At least with a baby, there'd be a reason for being awake at 3 a.m. Sarah studied him, trying to read between the lines. Was this about helping her or about filling his empty life with purpose? Did it matter? I can't pay much rent with a newborn, won't be able to work full-time. Did I ask for rent? The bookkeeping you've done has already saved me more than I'd pay a hired hand for a year. Consider us even. Thomas, just think About it. That's all I'm asking. She nodded, returning to her knitting, but her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears. Staying meant safety for her and the baby, but it also meant deeper entanglement with this complicated man and his ghosts. Outside, snow began falling again, as if the weather itself conspired to keep them together. Sarah thought about Doc Morrison's words about wounded hearts and scar tissue. She thought about the way Thomas's face softened when he felt the baby move. She thought about the dangerous comfort of domestic evenings and shared silences. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll think about it." Thomas nodded, trying to hide his relief. They returned to their evening tasks, her knitting, his reading, but both were intensely aware of the other. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and two careful hearts continued their cautious dance around the truth neither was ready to name. In the nursery down the hall, the crib waited, Maggie's blanket draped over its rail. Soon it would hold new life, a baby who would know nothing of the grief that had preceded its arrival. Sarah hoped that innocence might be enough to heal them. All time would tell. For now she had an offer to consider and tiny socks to finish. The future could wait another day. Sarah couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, and her mind wouldn't stop circling Thomas's offer. Stay until spring. Simple words that felt anything but simple. She rose quietly, wrapping herself in a shawl, and padded to the kitchen for water. The house was still, moonlight streaming through windows to illuminate the familiar space. This cabin had become home in ways her tiny apartment with David never had. The packed suitcase sat in her closet, ready since the day after Doc Morrison's visit. Old habits died hard. Always be ready to run, never get too comfortable. Never depend too deeply on anyone's kindness. David had taught her that lesson well. She'd learned other lessons too, though, like how Thomas took his coffee, black, 2 sugars, how he favored his left shoulder on cold mornings from an old injury, how his rare smiles transformed his entire face. Dangerous knowledge for someone trying to maintain professional distance. A sound from the living room made her freeze. Thomas sat in his chair by the dying fire, head in his hands. She should retreat, give him privacy, but something in his posture spoke of a pain too sharp to bear alone. "Thomas?" He looked up, startled. Even in the dim light, she could see the wetness on his cheeks. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. Baby's doing gymnastics." She moved closer, noting the photo album open on his lap. Couldn't sleep either. "Anniversary," he said simply. 3 years ago tonight." Sarah sank into her usual chair. "Tell me about that night if you want." Thomas stared into the embers. "Storm came up fast like they do. Maggie was having contractions, but we thought we had time. First babies usually take a while." His voice was flat, emotionless, but something went wrong. The bleeding started, and I knew we were in trouble. Sarah remained silent, letting him speak. Tried to call Doc Morrison, but the phone lines were down. Tried to drive, but the road was already impassable. So I bundled her up and started walking. Figured if I could get to the main road, maybe... He shook his head. She kept telling me to leave her, save the baby, as if I could choose. Thomas made it about 2 miles before she went quiet. I kept walking, carrying her until I couldn't anymore. Jim Paulson found us the next morning. I was hypothermic, hallucinating, kept insisting they were both fine, just sleeping. The weight of his grief filled the room. Sarah rose and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands. They were ice cold. "It wasn't your fault. I should have insisted she stay in town when the weather looked chancy. Should have been more prepared. Should have..." "Stop!" Her voice was firm. "You did everything you could. Sometimes terrible things happen despite our best efforts. Is that what you tell yourself about David? That you did everything you could?" The question stung. "That's different. Is it? You blame yourself for trusting him, for believing in love. I blame myself for not saving mine." They stared at each other in the moonlight. 2 people stripped of pretense by grief and understanding. Then Thomas pulled his hands free and stood abruptly. "You should go back to bed. Not good for the baby, you being up like this." But Sarah had reached her limit of careful distance. "Is that why you want me to stay? Because you couldn't save them, so you need to save us?" "Maybe." The admission seemed torn from him. "Does it matter why?" "Yes, because I won't be your penance, Thomas. This baby and I aren't your chance to rewrite history." "I know that. Do you? Because sometimes you look at me and I can see you, calculating how many weeks pregnant Maggie was, how many I am, what you do differently this time." Thomas flinched as if slapped. "That's not... I don't." "Yes, you do. And I understand it, I do. But I can't be her, Thomas. I'm not your wife. This isn't your baby. And staying here pretending otherwise isn't fair to any of us." "So you're leaving." His voice was dead. Sarah stood, wrapping the shawl tighter. "I don't know. I packed my bag 3 days ago, right after Doc's visit. Been trying to work up the courage to go." "What stopped you?" The question hung in the air. Sarah could list practical reasons: the weather, her condition, the lack of options. But standing here in the moonlight with this broken man who'd shown her more kindness than she'd ever known, only truth would do. "You," she admitted. "The way you make sure I eat breakfast even when I say I'm not hungry. How you built a step stool so I could reach the high shelves without asking. The way you talk to the baby when you think I'm not listening." "Sarah, I'm falling in love with you and it terrifies me." The words tumbled out, unstoppable now. "Because you're still in love with a ghost and I'm just a convenient substitute. And when you realize that, when you remember I'm not her..." Thomas crossed the space between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "You're not her," he said fiercely. "Maggie was sunshine and laughter and certainty. You're moonlight and courage and challenge. You're nothing like her, and that's why..." "Why what?" "Why I can't sleep for thinking about you. Why the house feels empty when you're in another room. Why I'm terrified you'll leave, and equally terrified you'll stay." They stood frozen, his hands on her face, her hands covering his. The baby chose that moment to kick hard, breaking the spell. "I should go," Sarah whispered. "Should you?" She pulled away, needing distance to think. At the hallway, she paused. "I can't be second best, Thomas. I've been that before. I won't do it again. I'm not asking you to. Aren't you? Every time you look at me, you see what you lost. Every kindness is about making amends for failing them." Thomas moved toward her, then stopped. "At first, maybe, but not now. Now I see you. Sarah, who sings off-key while cooking. Sarah, who reorganized my entire filing system and lectures me about financial planning. Sarah, who's brave enough to start over with nothing but determination." Pretty words. Truth. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know how to prove it to you. Yes, saving you that first night was about them. But keeping you here, wanting you to stay, that's about us, whatever us might be." Sarah felt tears threatening. "I need to think. I need space. Take all the space you need, just don't leave without saying goodbye. Please." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to her room. Behind the locked door, she sat on the bed, hands pressed to her belly. "What do we do, little one?" she whispered. "Do we run towards safety or stay for love?" The baby shifted, settling into a more comfortable position. No answers there, just life moving forward as it always did, regardless of the complications. Adults created. Outside her window, snow began to fall again. But this time, it seemed less like a trap and more like grace. One more day to decide, one more chance to choose between safety and the terrifying possibility of happiness. In the living room, Thomas stared at the photo album, then slowly closed. The past would always be part of him, but maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be all of him. Time would tell whether 2 wounded hearts could build something new from the ashes of their separate griefs. But first, they had to survive this night, this admission, this breaking point that might be an ending or a beginning. Sarah didn't unpack her suitcase, but she didn't carry it to the door either. Sometimes the bravest thing was simply to wait and see what morning would bring. December arrived with a softening of the weather. Not warm by any means, but the brutal cold had eased, and the snow fell in gentle flakes rather than driving sheets. Sarah hadn't left. After that night of revelations, they'd found a new equilibrium. Careful, but honest, aware of feelings neither was ready to fully explore. Thomas stood in the barn, looking at the boxes stored in the loft. Christmas decorations, untouched for 3 years. Maggie had loved Christmas with the enthusiasm of a child, turning their simple cabin into a wonderland of lights and greenery. Just going to stare at them, or might you bring them down? He turned to find Sarah in the barn doorway, bundled in one of his old coats that swallowed her despite her pregnancy. "Wasn't sure if you celebrated," he said. "Haven't had much reason to lately." She moved closer, noting the dust on the boxes. "But this year I'd like to, for the baby, if nothing else." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. The baby wouldn't remember this Christmas, but maybe they would, and maybe that mattered all. Right then, Thomas pulled down the first box, then another. Fair warning, Maggie went a bit overboard with decorations. That was an understatement. Box after box revealed treasures, hand-carved ornaments, strings of lights, garlands of evergreen and holly. A beautiful nativity, set carved from pine. "These are gorgeous," Sarah breathed, holding up a delicate snowflake ornament. "Did she make all of these?" "Some. Others were family pieces, my grandmother's, my mother's. That snowflake was our first Christmas together." They carried the boxes inside, spreading the contents across the living room floor. Sarah's eyes shone as she examined each piece, asking about their histories. Thomas found himself remembering happier times, stories that came easier now. "We'll need a tree," Sarah said. "A real one. There's a good stand of pines on the North Ridge. We could take the sled, make an afternoon of it. If you're up for it. Not too strenuous, and the fresh air would do you good." Sarah's smile was answer enough. 2 days later, they set out under a brilliant winter sun. Thomas had hitched Old Belle to the sled, and Sarah sat wrapped in blankets like a Russian princess, laughing as they glided over the snow. "This is magical," she said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Thomas guided Belle toward the pine stand, stealing glances at Sarah's joy-flushed face. When had her happiness become so important to him? When had her laughter become the best sound in his world? They found the perfect tree, 6 feet tall, full, but not too wide for the cabin. Thomas cut it down while Sarah collected pine cones and holly branches for additional decorating. "Look," she said suddenly, pointing to tracks in the snow. "Deer, elk, see the size, probably the herd that winters in the valley." He helped her stand, noting how she swayed slightly. "You okay?" "Just a little dizzy. Baby's sitting weird today." Concern creased his features. "Let's get you back." The ride home was quieter, Sarah leaning against him for support. He could feel the baby moving against his side, where she pressed close, and something fierce and protective rose in his chest. Back at the cabin, he insisted she rest while he brought in the tree. But Sarah was having none of it. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she protested, helping to position the tree in the stand. They decorated together as evening fell. Sarah directed from the couch when Thomas wouldn't let her climb the stepladder, laughing at his attempts to evenly distribute ornaments. "No, the glass ball goes on the left. No, your other left. Woman, you're worse than a drill sergeant, and you have no sense of balance. That side is practically bare." He threw a piece of tinsel at her, which she dodged, giggling. The sound filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. When they finished, they stood back to admire their work. The tree glowed with lights, ornaments catching and reflecting the shine. The whole cabin had been transformed, garlands over doorways, candles in windows, the nativity on the mantel. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly. "Yeah," Thomas agreed, but he wasn't looking at the tree. They made hot chocolate and sat by the fire, the baby active between them. Sarah had taken to narrating the baby's movements. "That's a foot in my ribs. Oh, and there's an elbow. This child is going to be a gymnast." Or a bronc rider, Thomas suggested. Don't even joke about that. I want this baby to have a nice, safe career. Accounting, maybe. Boring. Safe, she countered. There's value in safe. Their eyes met, the word hanging between them with multiple meanings. Then Sarah yawned, breaking the moment. Bed for you, Thomas said firmly. In a minute. I want to look at the tree a little longer. She settled deeper into the couch. I haven't had a real Christmas in years, not since my parents. What did you do for holidays? After they died? Foster homes, mostly. Some tried to make it special. Others just went through the motions. Last year with David, she shrugged. He went to his family's. I wasn't invited. Thomas felt anger surge at this unknown man who treated Sarah so carelessly. His loss, that's what I tell myself. Still hurt, though, being deemed not good enough for Christmas dinner. Sarah, he waited until she looked at him. You're good enough, more than good enough. Any man who can't see that is a fool. Even you, the question caught him off guard. Especially me. I'm the biggest fool of all, thinking I could keep you at arm's length when you've already gotten under my skin. Sarah's breath caught. Since that night of confrontation, they'd been careful with words, dancing around feelings. This was the first crack in their mutual caution. Thomas, I know we agreed to take things slow. I know you need time and space. I'm not pushing, just wanted you to know. You're not second best. You're not a replacement. You're you, and that's everything. Sarah blinked back tears. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself, but she knew. Better. You can't say things like that when I'm too huge to run away. Maybe that's why I'm saying them now. Despite the serious words, his tone was light, teasing. Sarah threw a pillow at him, which he caught easily. Bed, he said again. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. I'm the closest thing you've got out here. Go on, before you fall asleep on the couch. She stood, pausing to kiss his cheek. A brief touch, there and gone, but it burned like a brand. Good night, Thomas. Thank you for today, for all of it. After she'd gone, Thomas sat alone, staring at the Christmas tree. 3 years ago, he'd packed these decorations, thinking he'd never use them again. But here they were, shining in the darkness, proof that life went on even when you thought it had ended. Through the window, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. In 2 weeks it would be Christmas, his first real Christmas since losing Maggie. The thought should have hurt more than it did. Instead, he found himself planning what to get Sarah, something practical but meaningful. What special meal to cook, whether the baby would come before or after the holiday. The future, which had been a blank wall for so long, suddenly seemed full of possibility, all because a desperate young woman had stumbled out of a storm and into his life. God worked in mysterious ways, his mother used to say. Looking at the twinkling tree, thinking of Sarah's laughter and the baby's strong movements, Thomas was beginning to believe she'd been right. He banked the fire, turned off all but the tree lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow there would be more decorating, more laughter, more careful steps towards something neither of them quite dared name yet. But it was coming, as inevitable as Christmas itself. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas found himself looking forward to unwrapping the future, whatever it might hold. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland. Sarah woke early, partly from excitement and partly from the baby's insistent movements. She padded to the kitchen, intent on making special Christmas breakfast, but Thomas was already there. The table was set with the good china she'd found in the cupboard, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air. "Merry Christmas," he said, looking almost shy. "Thought I'd return the favor. You're always cooking for me. You made cinnamon rolls." She couldn't hide her amazement. "From scratch? My mother's recipe. Haven't made them in years, so no promises they're edible. They were more than edible. They were perfect." Sarah made appreciative noises as she ate, frosting on her fingers like a child. "Present time?" Thomas suggested when they'd finished eating. I thought we agreed no presents, money being tight and all. We agreed no expensive presents. These are different. He led her to the living room, where a few wrapped packages sat under the tree. Sarah had added her own contributions. Wrapped in brown paper, she decorated with pine sprigs. "You first," she insisted, handing him a soft package. Thomas unwrapped it carefully, revealing a thick scarf knitted in deep blue wool. The pattern was complex, clearly representing hours of work. "When did you have time to make this?" "Evenings, after you went to bed. Do you like it?" "It's perfect." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, despite the warm cabin. "My turn." He handed her a rectangular package. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with her initials. "For after the baby comes," he explained, "to record all those firsts. My mother kept one for me. It's in the attic somewhere. Thought you might want to do the same." Sarah traced the initials with one finger, too moved to speak. It was the perfect gift, practical but deeply personal, acknowledging her impending motherhood while being just for her. "There's more," Thomas said, producing another package. This one was smaller, oddly shaped. Sarah unwrapped it to find a wooden mobile, delicately carved with animals. Horses, deer, rabbits and birds, all native to the area. "Did you make this?" "Been working on it in the barn. Figured the little one should know the local wildlife." Each animal was perfect, detailed down to tiny hooves and feathers. The hours of work it represented, the care in each cut. Sarah felt tears threatening. "Thomas, it's beautiful. Beyond beautiful. There's one more thing." He seemed nervous now, reaching behind the tree for a large, flat package. "This isn't exactly a gift, more of a hope." Sarah unwrapped it slowly, revealing a framed sketch. It showed the cabin in spring, gardens blooming around it, a woman sitting on the porch with a baby in her arms while a man worked in the yard. The detail was exquisite, down to the expression of contentment on the woman's face. "Is this what I hope for?" Thomas said quietly. "If you'll stay, not just until spring, but longer, as long as you want." Sarah stared at the drawing, seeing the future he envisioned. A real home, a family, a life built together. It was everything she'd dreamed of before David had shattered those dreams. "I have something else for you," she said, needing to move before she dissolved entirely. She retrieved a flat package from behind the couch. "It's not much," Thomas unwrapped it to find a small oil painting. The view from the cabin at sunset, the mountains purple in the distance, the sky ablaze with color. She'd painted it from memory during the long storm days, working in secret. "You paint?" "A little. It was my mother's hobby. She taught me before." Sarah shrugged. "I haven't painted in years. But being here, the beauty of it all, I wanted to capture it. It's incredible. You've got real talent, Sarah. It's how I see this place now, not as a shelter from the storm, but as home." She met his eyes. "That sketch you drew? I want that too, all of it. But I'm scared." Thomas set the painting carefully aside and moved closer, taking her hands. "I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. But maybe we can be scared together." "Is that enough? Being scared together?" "It's a start." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not David, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. This ranch, this life, it's not glamorous, but it's real, and I want to share it with you, both of you." As if, in response, the baby kicked hard. Sarah gasped, then laughed. "I think someone approves." "Smart kid." Thomas kept hold of one hand while placing his other on her belly. "Already knows a good deal when they hear one." They stood there, connected by touch and hope, while the Christmas tree lights twinkled and snow began to fall softly outside. It wasn't a proposal exactly, wasn't a declaration of love in so many words, but it was a promise, a commitment to try, to build something together from the ashes of their separate pasts. "I need to give you your last present," Sarah said eventually. "There's more?" She led him to the kitchen, where she had hidden a cake in the pantry. It was slightly lopsided but covered in chocolate frosting with "Happy Birthday" written in careful script. "How did you know?" "Found your birth certificate when I was organizing papers." December 25th. That must have been hard as a kid. Christmas and birthday all at once. Maggie always made sure they were separate. Christmas morning, then birthday afternoon. His voice was thick with memory and gratitude. No one's made me a birthday cake in 3 years. Well, that changes now. Sarah lit the single candle she'd placed on top. Make a wish. Thomas looked at her belly where their future kicked and turned, at the cake she'd made despite limited resources, at the cabin decorated with care and hope. Then he closed his eyes and blew out the candle. "What did you wish for?" Sarah asked. "Can't tell you. Ruins the wish." But his smile said everything. They ate cake for lunch, sitting by the fire like children playing hooky. Sarah told stories of past Christmases, good and bad. Thomas shared memories of his parents, of Maggie, weaving the past into the present instead of keeping it locked away. As afternoon faded to evening, they worked together on dinner. A simple roast with vegetables, nothing fancy, but made special by the day and the company. The baby had settled, finally quiet, after a day of activity. "Thank you," Sarah said as they cleaned up together, "for all of this. For taking me in, for caring, for giving me hope again." "Thank you," Thomas replied, "for bringing me back to life." They didn't kiss. That would come later when the time was right. But Thomas pressed his lips to her forehead, a blessing and a promise, and Sarah leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished and home. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh white. Inside, 2 wounded hearts continued their slow journey toward healing, helped along by Christmas magic and the tiny life that connected them. The sketch Thomas had given her sat propped on the mantel, a vision of spring and possibility. Looking at it, Sarah believed for the first time that such a future was possible. Not guaranteed, life didn't offer guarantees, but possible. And on Christmas night, with a handmade mobile hanging above an empty crib and a birthday cake demolished. On the counter, possibility felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. January brought an unexpected thaw. Temperatures rose above freezing for the first time in months, turning the pristine snow to slush and mud. Water dripped steadily from the cabin's eaves, a constant percussion that seemed to echo Sarah's restless mood. "False spring," Thomas explained, watching her pace the living room. "Happens sometimes, won't last more than a week or 2. Then winter comes back with a vengeance." Sarah paused at the window, one hand pressed to her lower back. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, making every movement an effort. "If the road's clear." "They won't. Not properly. This kind of thaw makes them worse. Ice underneath, water on top. Death trap for vehicles." But they both knew what she wasn't saying. If the roads cleared, the outside world would intrude again. Decisions deferred by winter would demand attention. The phone rang, startling them both. It had been silent so long they'd almost forgotten it existed. Thomas answered warily. "McKay Ranch. Yes, she's here. Who's calling?" His expression darkened. He held the phone out to Sarah. "Says his name is David Chen." Sarah's face drained of color. She took the phone with trembling hands. "David." Thomas moved to leave, to give her privacy, but she grabbed his sleeve, keeping him close. "How did you find me?" she asked into the phone. Then, "No, I didn't take your money to take care of it. I left it on your kitchen table. What do you want?" Thomas watched her transformation, spine straightening, chin lifting, the scared girl becoming a protective mother. "No, you made your position clear. I don't care what your parents think now. David, you signed away your rights. You have no claim." She paused, listening, and her expression shifted to disbelief. "You want what?" "No, absolutely not. I don't care about your family's reputation. The baby and I are fine without you." Another pause. Her free hand found Thomas's, gripping tight. "I have a job and a safe place to live. We don't need your money. How did you even get this number?" Thomas could hear the male voice rising, though not the words. Sarah's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm hanging up now. Don't call again. If you try to contact me, I'll get a restraining order." She slammed the phone down, then stood shaking. "Hey," Thomas said softly, turning her to face him. You okay? He hired a private investigator, found out where I was, says his parents want to do right by the baby now that their friends know about it. She laughed bitterly. Funny how their conscience kicked in when people started gossiping. What does he want? To marry me. Can you believe that? 8 months after telling me to get rid of it, now he wants to play happy family. Says we can live in the guest house on his parents' property, raise the baby there. Like I'm some kind of broodmare they can stable conveniently out of sight. Thomas felt rage rise in his chest. He can't force you. He says he'll sue for custody if I don't cooperate. Says no judge will give a baby to an unwed mother with no money when the father's family can provide everything. Sarah's composure cracked. What if he's right? What if they take my baby? They won't. Thomas gripped her shoulders. You're not alone anymore, remember? We'll fight this. With what? I have nothing. You have me. You have this ranch. You have a job, a home, a community that's accepted you. That counts for something. Sarah searched his face. Why would you fight for us? We're not your responsibility, aren't you? The words came out fierce. You live in my home. You work on my ranch. You're carrying a child I've felt move, that I've made furniture for, that I already think of as... He stopped, afraid he'd said too much. As what? As mine, he admitted. Not by blood, but by choice. By love. The word hung between them, finally spoken aloud. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thomas. The phone rang again. This time Thomas answered, his voice hard. McKay Ranch? Mr. Chen, I'm going to say this once. Miss Sarah is under my protection. If you call again, if you show up here, if you threaten her in any way, you'll deal with me. And trust me, city boy, you don't want that. Yes, I know who you are. I also know Judge Peterson in town, Sheriff Williams, and every lawyer in 3 counties. We protect our own out here. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Good day. He hung up with controlled force, then turned to find Sarah staring at him. Your protection. Sorry if that was too... She silenced him by stepping into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Thank you. Thomas held her carefully, feeling the baby pressed between them. He won't take you from me, either of you. I won't let him. I'm scared. I know, but we'll handle this together. They stood holding each other while the false spring dripped outside. The melting snow revealed patches of brown earth, hints of the life waiting beneath winter's grip. But it also exposed dead grass, broken branches, all the damage winter had wrought. I should have told you about David before, Sarah said, pulling back slightly. I wanted to leave that life behind. We all have pasts. What matters is the future. What if he does come here? What if he brings lawyers and court orders, and then we'll be ready? Thomas touched her face gently. Sarah, I meant what I said at Christmas. I want you to stay, not just for convenience or protection, but because you belong. Here, both of you. As your employee. No, as my partner in everything. He took a breath. Marry me. Sarah's eyes widened. What? I know it's sudden. I know we said we'd go slow, but if we're married, David has no claim. You'd have legal protection, financial security, a name for the baby. Stop! Sarah pressed fingers to his lips. Just stop. I won't marry you out of fear or convenience. I won't repeat that mistake. Thomas caught her hand, kissed her palm. Then marry me for love. Because I love you, Sarah Chen. Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as the unexpected gift you are. Marry me because when I think of spring, I see you in that garden. When I think of next Christmas, I see you teaching our child to hang ornaments. When I think of growing old, I see you beside me on that porch, still arguing about my bookkeeping. Our child? Sarah whispered. If you'll let me be their father, if you'll let me be your husband. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. I don't have a ring. I don't have pretty words. All I have is this ranch, these hands, and a heart that's yours if you want it. Sarah Chen, will you marry me? Outside, the false spring continued its temporary thaw. Water ran in tiny rivers, seeking low ground, following gravity's pull. Inside, two hearts hung suspended, waiting for an answer that would change everything. Sarah looked down at this man who'd saved her in more ways than one. She thought of David's entitled demands, his conditional love, his cowardice. Then she thought of Thomas bringing her tea without being asked, building furniture for a baby not his own, offering his beloved wife's blanket to warm another woman's child. "Ask me again," she said softly, "in spring, when the real thaw comes and the flowers bloom and this baby is here safe. Ask me then, when we're not afraid or desperate or making decisions based on outside pressure. Ask me when the only reason to say yes is love." Thomas rose, understanding in his eyes. "I'll wait. But Sarah, know this, my offer stands regardless. Of David or courts or anyone else, I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said, and kissed him. Their first real kiss, soft and sure and full of promise. "Neither am I." The phone rang again. This time Thomas simply unplugged it. The outside world could wait. For now, they had each other. This fragile new understanding, and the faith that false springs always gave way to true ones. In time, the pains started just after midnight, 3 weeks after the false spring had given way to winter's return. Sarah woke with a gasp, her hand flying to her belly as a contraction rolled through her. "Just Braxton Hicks," she whispered to herself. "Practice contractions." But when the next one came, stronger and sooner than expected, she knew this was real. The baby was coming. She lay still, timing the contractions, not wanting to wake Thomas yet. They were still 15 minutes apart. Plenty of time. Outside, snow fell steadily. Not a blizzard, but enough to make travel difficult. Another contraction gripped her, this one taking her breath. When it passed, she eased out of bed and padded to Thomas's door. "Thomas," she knocked softly. "I think it's time." He was alert instantly, Rancher's reflexes serving him well. "The baby? You're sure?" "Pretty sure. Contractions are regular, getting stronger. I'll get the truck warmed up. Radio said roads are passable to town." "Thomas!" She caught his arm. "There's time. Let's not panic." But she could see the fear in his eyes, the memories of another night, another woman in labor. "We should go now, before the snow gets worse." "Okay, let me get dressed and grab the bag I packed." 20 minutes later, they were in the truck, creeping along snow-covered roads. Sarah gripped the door handle through each contraction, trying to breathe steadily. Thomas drove with white-knuckled concentration. "Tell me about your parents," Sarah said between contractions, needing distraction. "How did they meet?" Thomas recognized the tactic and obliged. "County dance. Dad was the worst dancer in 3 states, but Mom said yes anyway. Stepped on her feet so many times, she had bruises for a week." "Romantic," Sarah gasped as another contraction hit. "He made up for it, brought her flowers every Friday for 40 years. He glanced at her. "How far apart?" 10 minutes. Maybe less." He pressed slightly harder on the accelerator. They were still 20 miles from town. "What flowers did she like?" Sarah asked when she could speak again. "Daisies. Said they were happy flowers. Dad planted a whole field of them behind the house." His voice caught. "Maggie loved them too. Used to make chains for her hair in summer." Sarah reached over, squeezed his hand. "Tell me more." So he talked about his parents, his childhood, anything to fill the space between contractions. But the spaces were getting shorter. "Thomas," Sarah said suddenly, "I think we need to pull over." "What? No, we're only 10 miles from—" "Thomas!" The urgency in her voice cut through his denial. "This baby isn't waiting. I can feel—" "Oh, God!" He found a wide spot and pulled over, leaving the engine running for heat. Sarah was panting, her face contorted with pain and effort. "Don't push yet," he said, moving to her side. "Let me check. I have to push. I can't not push. Thomas, the baby's coming now." This was his nightmare made real. A woman in labor, in a vehicle, in a snowstorm, miles from help. But Sarah wasn't Maggie, and he wasn't the same man he'd been 3 years ago. "Okay," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "Okay. I've delivered calves and foals. This isn't so different. Sarah laughed desperately. Did you just compare me to a cow? Prettiest cow I ever saw. He helped her recline the seat, grabbed the blankets from the back. We're going to do this together. You and me, and this impatient baby. I'm scared. Me too, but we're stronger than scared. He met her eyes. I won't let anything happen to you, either of you, I promise. The next contraction came like a wave, and Sarah bore down instinctively. Thomas positioned himself to help, drawing on every bit of medical knowledge he'd gleaned from years of ranch work. I can see the head, he said wonderingly, full of dark hair. You're doing great, Sarah, so great. It hurts, I know, but you're the strongest woman I know. One more push on the next contraction. Sarah gripped his hand hard enough to leave bruises. When the next wave came, she pushed with everything she had. Thomas guided the baby's head, then shoulders, and suddenly a tiny, perfect person slipped into his waiting hands. It's a girl, he breathed. Sarah, you have a daughter. The baby cried immediately, strong and loud in the confined space. Thomas cleared her airways, wrapped her in his shirt, and placed her on Sarah's chest. She's perfect, Sarah sobbed, cradling her daughter. Look at her, she's absolutely perfect, just like her mother. Thomas covered them both with blankets, cranking the heat higher. We need to get you both to the hospital. Wait. Sarah caught his hand. Thomas, you saved us, just like you tried to save them. You did it this time. He looked at the tiny girl, already rooting for her first meal, and felt 3 years of guilt begin to ease. We did it. Together. What time is it? He checked the dashboard clock. 3:17 a.m. February 15th, your parents' anniversary. She'd remembered from one of his stories. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe it is. He touched the baby's impossibly soft cheek. She needs a name. Emily, Sarah said softly. Emily Hope, for my mother and for Hope. Emily Hope Chen, it's perfect. McKay, Sarah corrected quietly. If the offer still stands. Emily Hope McKay. Thomas stared at her, unable to speak. Sarah smiled through her exhaustion. You delivered our daughter in a truck. In a snowstorm. You've earned the right to give her your name. She shifted the baby slightly. Both of us, actually. If you'll still have us. Sarah, I know I said wait for spring. But Thomas, you are my spring. You brought me back to life just like I brought you. I love you. Not from gratitude or desperation, but because you're the best man I've ever known. So I'm asking you now. Will you marry us? Emily and me? Instead of answering with words, Thomas leaned in and kissed her, gentle and sure. Baby Emily made a small sound of protest at being slightly squished. Is that a yes? Sarah asked when they parted. That's a yes to everything, forever. Yes. He started the truck moving again, slowly, carefully. Now let's get you both checked. Properly. Doc Morrison's going to have my hide for not getting you there sooner. You did perfectly, Sarah assured him. My hero. As they drove toward town and medical care, Emily settled into her first sleep, safe between her parents. The snow continued to fall, but inside the truck, a new family had been born. Not just the baby, but the bonds between 3 souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. Sometimes storms brought more than destruction. Sometimes they delivered exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it. And sometimes, on snow-covered roads in the deep of night, miracles wore the face of a tiny girl with her mother's nose and her chosen father's stubborn chin. Spring was still weeks away, but in that truck it had already arrived, the hospital room filled with early morning light as Emily Hope McKay announced her hunger with increasingly insistent cries. Sarah, still exhausted but glowing, guided her daughter to nurse, while Thomas watched from the bedside chair, unable to look away. She's got opinions already, Sarah murmured, wincing slightly as Emily latched on. Definitely takes after her father. Her father's right here if she needs anything, Thomas said, the words still feeling miraculous in his mouth. Dr. Morrison had checked them both thoroughly upon arrival. proclaiming mother and daughter perfectly healthy despite their dramatic entrance. "Leave it to Thomas McKay to deliver a baby in a blizzard," he'd said, though this time with a better outcome, thank God. Now, 6 hours later, the reality was settling in. Thomas had a daughter, not by blood, but by choice and love and a promise. Made in a truck while snow fell around them. "You should go home," Sarah said. "Get some rest, check the animals. Jake's handling the ranch. I'm not going anywhere." He reached out to touch Emily's downy head. "Can't believe she's really here." "I know. I keep thinking I'll wake up and still be pregnant." Sarah shifted the baby to her other side. "Thomas, about what I said in the truck. You want to take it back?" His heart clenched. No, I want to make sure you know I meant it. All of it, not just heat of the moment or hormones or—" "Sarah." He moved to sit on the bed beside her. "I've been waiting to hear you say yes since the day I proposed. Hell, probably since the day you reorganized my bookkeeping system and told me I was doing everything wrong." She laughed softly. "I was right, wasn't I? About everything." He kissed her forehead, then Emily's. "How soon can we make it official?" "The marriage or the adoption? Both, all of it. I want Emily to have my name legally. I want you to be my wife in every way that matters." A knock interrupted them. "Sorry to intrude," a nurse said, "but there's a visitor, says he's family." Sarah's face paled. "If it's David," but it was Jake Morrison, Doc's son and Thomas's nearest neighbor, carrying a vase of wildflowers obviously picked from his greenhouse. "Heard there was a new McKay in town," Jake said, grinning. "Had to come see for myself." "News travels fast," Thomas said, but he was smiling. "Are you kidding? Thomas McKay delivering a baby in his truck during a snowstorm? That's the biggest news this town's had in years." Jake set the flowers on the side table. "She's beautiful. Looks like her mama." "Thank God for that," Sarah said, relaxing. Jake's expression grew more serious. "Listen, I know it's not my business, but there was a fancy car asking directions. To your ranch this morning. City plates. Driver looked like he'd swallowed something sour." Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. "Thanks for the warning," Thomas said. "We'll handle it." After Jake left, they sat in worried silence until Emily's satisfied coos drew their attention back to what mattered. "He can't take her," Sarah said fiercely. "I won't let him." "We won't let him," Thomas corrected. "But let's make sure he has. No legal ground to stand on. Judge Peterson does marriages in his chambers. We could go tomorrow if you're released." "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed, "though I probably look terrible for a wedding." "You look perfect." "You always look perfect." "Liar." "But a sweet one." She yawned, exhaustion catching up. "Will you hold her while I sleep a bit?" Thomas took Emily carefully, still amazed by how tiny she was. The baby opened her eyes. They were dark like Sarah's, and seemed to study him with surprising focus. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your daddy. Not the one who made you, but the one who's going to love you every day of your life, going to teach you to ride horses and fix fences and read the weather. Your mama's going to teach you to be smart and strong and kind." Emily yawned, apparently unimpressed with his promises, and dozed off. Thomas settled back in the chair, daughter on his chest, watching Sarah sleep. 3 years ago, he'd sat in a hospital room with empty arms and a shattered heart. Now his arms were full, his heart healing with each tiny breath Emily took. Life had a strange way of circling back, of offering second chances when you least expected them. A movement in the doorway caught his eye. A man stood there, younger than Thomas, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the rural hospital. His face was handsome in a soft way, with weak chin and calculating eyes. "David Chen, I presume," Thomas said quietly, not wanting to wake Sarah or Emily. "Is that my daughter?" David's voice held entitlement rather than wonder. "No," Thomas said simply. "This is my daughter. Has been since the moment she drew breath. You can't—" "Keep your voice down." Thomas's tone was steel. "You want to talk, we do it in the hall, but you won't upset Sarah or wake this baby." David retreated to the hallway. Thomas carefully placed Emily in the bassinet and followed, closing the door softly behind him. "You have no right—" I have every right. Thomas interrupted. I held Sarah while she labored. I delivered that baby with my own hands. I've been here every step while you were where, living your comfortable life, pretending they didn't exist. I've changed my mind. I want to be involved. What you want stopped mattering the day you told Sarah to take care of it. You signed. Weigh your rights. She doesn't need you, and neither does Emily. Emily, she named her without me. She named her during a blizzard after I'd just helped bring her safely into this world. Where were you then? Thomas stepped closer. Let me make something clear. Sarah and I are getting married tomorrow. I'm adopting Emily. We're a family. Have been since before she was born. You're nothing but a sperm donor who got scared and ran. David's face flushed. My lawyers will tell you that you have no case. Abandonment, signed documents. Sarah's established residency here has employment, a home, a support system. What do you have? Parents who are embarrassed their friends found out? I could make things difficult. You could try. Thomas smiled coldly. But then I'd have to tell everyone how you treated the mother of your child. Small towns have long memories, and your family does business in this state. Would be a shame if every rancher, every supplier, every banker knew exactly what kind of man David Chen is. David paled. You're threatening me. I'm protecting my family. There's a difference. Thomas crossed his arms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to stay gone. If Sarah wants to contact you someday, that's her choice. But you don't call, you don't visit, you don't suddenly develop a conscience every time your parents' friends ask about the baby. And if I don't, then you'll learn what it means to cross a man who's already lost everything once and refuses to lose it again. Thomas's voice was quiet, but implacable. I buried a wife and child on that ranch. I'll do whatever it takes to protect the family I've been given a second chance with, whatever it takes. David stared at him, perhaps seeing for the first time the kind of man Sarah had found, not wealthy, not sophisticated, but solid as bedrock and twice as immovable. I could offer her money, security, a name with social standing. She has all. That, my money, my security, my name, and something you never gave her, respect, love, a partner who sees her worth. This isn't over. Yes, Thomas said firmly. It is. Don't make me prove it. David turned and walked away, his expensive shoes squeaking on the hospital linoleum. Thomas watched until he was gone, then returned to the room where his girls slept. Peacefully, Emily stirred in her bassinet, making small sounds. Thomas picked her up, holding her close. He's gone, little one, he whispered. Just you and me and Mama now, the way it should be. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Was that? Nobody important. Just the past, trying to interfere with the future. He brought Emily to her. But we're not going to let that happen, are we? No, Sarah said firmly, taking her daughter. We're not. Tomorrow we become official. Tomorrow you become Mrs. McKay, and Emily becomes mine in every way that counts. We're already yours, Sarah said softly, have been since you carried me in from that storm. Thomas kissed them both, his girls, his miracles, his second chance at everything. Outside, the February sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow to sparkling. It looked like diamonds scattered across the world, precious and brilliant and full of promise, just like the future stretching out before them, bright with possibility and love. Judge Peterson's chambers smelled of old leather and coffee, a comforting combination that eased Sarah's nervousness. She wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the nurse, Thomas in his best shirt and jeans, and Emily slept peacefully in the carrier between them. Well now, the judge said, eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Thomas McKay getting married. Never thought I'd see the day again. Things change, Thomas said simply, taking Sarah's hand. Indeed they do. And this little one? The judge peered at Emily with grandfatherly interest. Emily Hope, soon to be Emily Hope McKay, if the adoption papers are in order. Everything's ready. Jim Anders drew them up yesterday, worked late to get them done. The judge shuffled papers on his desk. The biological father's signature is already on file from months ago. This is really just a formality. Sarah felt Thomas's hand tighten on hers. They'd worried David might have tried to interfere, but apparently his encounter with Thomas had been enough to send him back to his comfortable life. "Before we begin," Judge Peterson said, "I need to ask, Sarah, you're entering this marriage freely? No coercion, no pressure? Completely freely," Sarah assured him. "This is what I want, what we both want. And Thomas, you're prepared to take on this young lady and her daughter, raise the child as your own." "I've been preparing for it since the day they arrived," Thomas said. "They're already mine in every way that matters. This just makes it legal." The judge nodded, satisfied. "Then let's make you a family." The ceremony was simple, witnesses pulled from the courthouse staff. But when Thomas slipped his mother's ring onto Sarah's finger, retrieved from the ranch that morning, and promised to love, honor, and cherish her, Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't desperate convenience or calculated protection. This was love, pure and simple. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Peterson announced. Thomas cupped her face gently, mindful of Emily in her arms. "Hello, Mrs. McKay." "Hello, Mr. McKay," she whispered back, and sealed their union with a kiss that tasted of promises and tomorrows. The adoption was even simpler. Signatures on papers, the judge's seal, and suddenly Emily Hope Chen became Emily Hope McKay, daughter of Thomas and Sarah McKay of the McKay Ranch. "Congratulations," Judge Peterson said, shaking Thomas's hand. "Your parents would be proud, both of you starting fresh, building something new from something painful." Outside the courthouse, the February air was crisp, but not bitter. Thomas helped Sarah and Emily into the truck, then paused. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Just thinking. 3 months ago, I was alone in that cabin, convinced my life was over. Now I have a wife and daughter." He shook his head in wonder. "God sure works. In mysterious ways." "Maybe not so mysterious," Sarah said. "Maybe he just knew we needed each other." The drive home was quiet, Emily sleeping through it all. But when they turned into the ranch drive, Sarah gasped. Trucks and cars lined the road, and people milled about the front porch. "What's happening?" Thomas grinned. "Might have mentioned to Jake we were getting married today. Looks like the news spread." The entire community, it seemed, had gathered to welcome them home. Women had brought covered dishes, men had strung lights on the porch, and someone had even decorated with white ribbons and winter greenery. "We can't have a wedding without a party," Mabel from the general store called out, apparently forgetting her earlier judgment of Sarah's unmarried state. "Thomas McKay!" Doc Morrison boomed. "About time you stopped hiding on this ranch. And, Sarah, let me see that grandbaby of mine." "Grandbaby," Sarah murmured to Thomas. "He's decided to adopt you all as family," Thomas explained. "Doc doesn't have kids of his own." The impromptu reception was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. These people, who'd seemed standoffish during her pregnancy, now embraced her as one of their own. She was no longer the unwed mother seeking shelter. She was Thomas McKay's wife, and that carried weight here. "It's the way of small towns," Mary Paulson explained, bouncing Emily gently. "We're suspicious of outsiders, but fiercely protective of family, and your family now." Thomas worked the crowd, accepting congratulations and good-natured ribbing about his hermit days being over. But his eyes constantly found Sarah, checking on her, making sure she wasn't overwhelmed. As evening fell and guests began departing, pressing leftovers and baby gifts into their hands, Sarah found herself on the porch with Thomas, watching the last truck disappear down the drive. "That was unexpected," she said. "That was community," Thomas corrected. "Something I'd forgotten about. They came for us today, to show support, to welcome you properly, to celebrate new life after too much grief." Emily fussed in her carrier, and Sarah lifted her out, swaying gently. "She's going to grow up surrounded by this. People who know her, watch out for her, teach her things we can't. Is that okay? It's different from city life." "It's perfect." Sarah leaned into his side. "It's the childhood I wanted but never had after my parents died. Roots, belonging, family beyond blood." They went inside together, their home now filled with the evidence of community. Casseroles in the refrigerator, a handmade quilt for Emily's crib, preserves and pickles and promises of help when needed. "Mrs. Anders slipped me something," Thomas said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a deed transfer already notarized. "I added your name to the ranch papers. You're not just my wife, you're my partner. Half of everything is yours." Sarah stared at the document. "Thomas, I didn't marry you for—" "I know, but I want you to have security, real security. This ranch is your home, yours and Emily's, no matter what. Nothing's going to happen to you. Ranching's dangerous work, and I've learned life doesn't offer guarantees." He touched Emily's cheek. "But if something did happen, I need to know you're both protected. The ranch is paid for, profitable enough to support you. It's yours as much as mine now." Sarah set the papers aside and wrapped her arms around him, Emily between them. "I love you. Have I said that today?" "Only a dozen times. Say it again. I love you, Thomas McKay, for your generous heart and stubborn ways and terrible bookkeeping." "Hey, my bookkeeping's improved. I have a good teacher." They settled by the fire, Emily nursing contentedly. The house felt different, fuller, warmer, alive with possibility. On the mantel, the photograph of Thomas and Maggie had been joined by one of Thomas, Sarah, and Emily, taken at the courthouse. "Two families," Sarah observed, following his gaze. "Both real, both loved. You don't mind the pictures? She's part of your story. Without your loss, you might not have been here when I needed shelter. Without my abandonment, I might not have been desperate enough to walk through a storm." Sarah shifted Emily to her shoulder. "We can honor the past while building the future." Thomas pulled her close, his girl safe in his arms. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched cold and clear, stars brilliant in the winter sky. But inside, three hearts beat in warm harmony, a family forged by storm and sustained by love. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, a ranch to run, a baby to raise, a marriage to build. But tonight, they were complete. The outside world had returned, blessed their union, and withdrawn, leaving them to write their new story together. And what a story it would be. True spring arrived in April with a vengeance, turning the ranch into a muddy mess as snow melted and earth thawed. Sarah stood on the porch, Emily on her hip, watching Thomas work with a new colt in the corral. 2 months of marriage had settled into comfortable rhythms. Early mornings with the baby, shared chores, quiet evenings planning for the future. "Your daddy's got away with horses," Sarah told Emily, who gurgled in response. At 2 months old, she was bright-eyed and curious, tracking movement and responding to voices with increasing awareness. "She talking back already?" Thomas called, leading the colt to the fence. "Of course, she's got opinions about everything, just like her parents." Thomas vaulted the fence with easy grace, coming to steal a kiss from his wife and daughter. He smelled of hay and honest work, a scent Sarah had come to associate with home. "Garden plot's ready," he said. "Jake brought those seedlings you wanted." Sarah's eyes lit up. The tomatoes, and peppers, squash, beans, even some flowers for the edges. He tickled Emily's chin. "Your mama's determined to turn us into farmers instead of ranchers." "Diversification," Sarah corrected. "The vegetables we don't eat, we can sell at the farmer's market. I've run the numbers." "Of course you have," but he was smiling. Sarah's business acumen had already improved the ranch's profitability, her suggested changes proving sound. They walked together to the prepared plot behind the house, where dark soil waited for planting. Sarah had designed the layout carefully, maximizing space and companion planting for natural pest control. "Mama would have loved this," she said, softly, kneeling to touch the earth. "She grew the most amazing gardens. Even in our tiny apartment yard, she made things bloom." "You will too." Thomas knelt beside her, Emily secure in her carrier. "It's in your blood." They planted together, Thomas following Sarah's precise instructions while Emily watched from her shaded spot. The work was meditative, hopeful, placing seeds and seedlings into earth, trusting in sun and rain and time to bring forth life. I want Emily to know this, Sarah said, patting soil around a tomato plant. How food grows, where it comes from, the patience it takes. She'll learn. Same way I did following my parents around. He paused, sitting back on his heels. Sarah, I've been thinking about the future. What about it? More children, brothers or sisters for Emily, if you want. Sarah's hands stilled. They hadn't discussed this, both too focused on the present to plan that far ahead. Do you want more children? I want what you want. But yeah, I'd like Emily to have siblings. This ranch is too big for just one child to inherit. Already planning her inheritance. Planning our legacy, he corrected. What we'll build together, pass on together. Sarah looked at him. This man who'd gone from hermit to husband to father in the span of a season. I'd like more children, when the time is right. When Emily's a bit older. No rush. We've got time. It was a gift, that casual confidence in their future. 6 months ago, neither had believed in tomorrow. Now they planned in years, decades even. Emily fussed, ready for her lunch. Sarah settled on the porch steps to nurse while Thomas continued planting. The ranch spread before them. Pastures greening with spring grass, cattle grazing peacefully, mountains standing eternal guard in the distance. We should have a party, Sarah said suddenly. A real wedding reception. We never had one, with everything happening so fast. Bit late for that, isn't it? Not a wedding reception then, a spring celebration. Invite everyone who helped us, who welcomed us. Celebrate new beginnings. Thomas considered, then nodded. Anniversary of the storm that brought you here. Seems fitting. November's a long way off. Then we'll celebrate Emily's half-birthday, or the garden's first harvest, or just because we want to gather our friends. He joined them on the steps. When did I become a man who throws parties? When you became a man with things to celebrate. That evening they made lists, food to prepare, people to invite, music to arrange. The cabin filled with laughter as they debated details, Emily contributing her own sounds from her bouncy seat. We'll need to clean out the barn for dancing, Thomas said. Haven't done that since Maggie, Sarah finished gently. Is that okay? More than okay. She loved barn dances, said they were the heartbeat of ranch communities. He reached for Sarah's hand. Time to let this place's heart beat again. Over the following weeks, spring exploded across the ranch. The garden grew with startling vigor. Cattle dropped healthy calves, and wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant color. Sarah often walked with Emily in a carrier, showing her daughter the land that would be her inheritance, not just in acres and assets, but in belonging. One afternoon, she found Thomas in the small cemetery on the hill, standing before 2 graves. She'd been here before, had laid wildflowers on Maggie and the baby's markers, but this was the first time she'd found Thomas visiting. Sorry, she began, but he held out an arm, inviting her close. Don't be. I was just talking, telling, and them about you and Emily, about how happy we are. Sarah leaned into him, Emily peaceful against her chest. What do you think she'd say? About us? Maggie? She'd probably threaten to haunt me if I messed this up. His voice was light, but sincere. She'd like you, your strength, your stubbornness, the way you've brought this place back to life. I had help. We helped each other. He pressed a kiss to her temple. That's what partners do. They stood, quietly, surrounded by spring's resurrection. The graves no longer seemed like endings, but part of the story. Chapters that had closed so new ones could begin. The party, Sarah said eventually. Let's have it soon, while the flowers are blooming and everyone can enjoy the spring. A celebration of life, all of it, past, present, future. Yes, Thomas agreed. Let's fill this ranch with music and in laughter. Let's show Emily how communities celebrate. Let's give thanks for storms that bring unexpected blessings. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Emily cooing at the butterflies dancing through the air. Behind them, the cemetery drowsed peacefully in the sun, its sorrow transformed by the joy of the living. Spring had kept its promise, bringing new life from winter's death. And on the McKay ranch, 3 hearts that had found each other in darkness now bloomed in the light, ready to share their abundance with the world. November arrived with familiar ferocity, marking 1 year since Sarah had stumbled through the blizzard to Thomas's door. But this time the McKay ranch stood ready for winter, hay stocked, animals sheltered, and the cabin warm with preparation rather than isolation. Sarah stood at the same window where she'd first watched Thomas work, Emily playing at her feet. Her daughter, now 9 months old, had Thomas's determined expression when concentrating on her blocks. The simple gold band on Sarah's finger caught the light as she reached down to steady Emily's ambitious tower. "Storm coming," Thomas said, entering with an armload of firewood. "Radio says it'll be a big one." "Like last year? Maybe worse." He stacked the wood, then scooped up Emily, who shrieked with delight. "But we're ready this time, aren't we, little bear?" Emily babbled enthusiastically, patting her father's face with chubby hands. She adored Thomas, lighting up whenever he entered a room. The feeling was clearly mutual. "I've made extra stew," Sarah said, "just in case." "In case what?" As if in answer, a knock sounded at the door. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the wind was picking up. Thomas opened the door to reveal a young couple, the woman heavily pregnant, both looking cold and frightened. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, "but our car broke down about a mile back. My wife, she's having contractions. We saw your light." Sarah was already moving, her arms reaching out to the woman. "Come in, both of you. Thomas, get them by the fire." It was like looking in a mirror to the past. The frightened young woman, the worried partner, the storm bearing down. But this time, Sarah knew exactly what to do. "I'm Sarah," she said, helping the woman to the couch. "This is my husband, Thomas." "What's your name?" "Maria," the woman gasped. "And this is Carl. The baby's not due for 2 weeks, but babies keep their own schedules," Sarah soothed. "I should know. This little one," she indicated Emily, who watched with wide eyes, "decided to arrive during a snowstorm, too. Born right in our truck." Maria's eyes widened. "Really? Really? And she's perfect. You're going to be fine." Sarah felt Maria's belly during a contraction, noting the position. "Thomas, call Doc Morrison. Tell him we might need him." But the phone lines were already down, the storm having arrived with stunning speed. Snow lashed the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. "Looks like we're on our own," Thomas said calmly. "Good thing we've done this before." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah coached Maria through contractions, while Thomas kept Carl calm and Emily entertained. It was surreal, the reversal of roles. Sarah as the confident caregiver, Thomas as the steady support. "You're doing great," Sarah told Maria. "Remember to breathe. The baby knows what to do." "You sound like a midwife," Maria panted. "Just a woman who's been where you are." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Scared in a stranger's house, wondering if everything will be okay. But look," she gestured to Emily, who was showing Carl her favorite toy. Sometimes the best things come from the scariest moments. As the night wore on and Maria's labor progressed, Sarah found herself sharing her own story, how she'd been abandoned, desperate, alone, how Thomas had taken her in, first from duty, then from caring, finally from love. "He delivered Emily himself," Sarah said, "saved both our lives, and now we're a family." "That's beautiful," Maria whispered, then cried out as another contraction hit. "Almost there," Sarah encouraged. "Thomas, we're going to need those clean towels." Thomas moved with practiced efficiency, no longer the panicked man who'd found a pregnant woman at his door. Together they created a makeshift birthing area, drawing on their shared experience. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with strong lungs, it was into Sarah's waiting hands, with Thomas supporting Maria and Carl, looking on in awe. "He's perfect," Sarah announced, clearing the baby's airways and wrapping him warmly. "A storm baby just like Emily." Maria cradled her son with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what we would have done." "You'd have managed," Thomas said. "People are stronger than they know in a crisis. But we're glad you found us." Carl shook Thomas's hand repeatedly, too emotional for words. Emily, for her part, seemed fascinated by the new baby, reaching out gentle fingers to touch his hand. "Careful, sweet girl," Sarah said. "Gentle touches." They settled the new family in the guest room, Sarah's old room, with promises to get them to town once the storm passed. Thomas built up the fire, while Sarah made sure everyone had food and water. "Full circle," Thomas said quietly, when they finally had a moment alone in their room, Emily asleep in her crib. "I was thinking the same thing." Sarah leaned against him, exhausted but exhilarated. "A year ago I was Maria, scared, alone, desperate. Not alone, not from the moment you knocked on that door. I didn't knock. I collapsed. Best thing that ever happened to me," Thomas said, pulling her close. "You collapsing at my door?" Sarah thought about the journey from that night to this. The careful trust built, the walls torn down, the love that had grown from shared pain and mutual healing. A year that had transformed them both. "Do you think they'll stay in touch?" she asked. "Maria and Carl? Maybe. Storms have a way of creating bonds." He kissed her hair. "Though I hope they don't make a habit of having babies in our cabin." Sarah laughed softly. "Could be worse. We could become the regional emergency birthing center." "Don't even joke about that." But there was something profound about the night's events. The way they'd been able to pass on the kindness shown to them, the confidence with which they'd handled the crisis, the peace of knowing they could weather any storm together. In the guest room, a new baby's cries mingled with the wind's howling. Sarah rose to check on them, finding Maria nursing successfully, while Carl hovered protectively. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," Maria said. "I still can't believe you both knew exactly what to do." "Experience is a good teacher," Sarah said, "and love makes you brave when you need to be." She returned to bed, where Thomas waited with Emily, who'd woken from the noise. "Our girl wants her mama," he said, passing the baby over. Sarah settled, Emily between them, creating a warm nest of family. Outside, the storm that had brought them together a year ago raged on. But inside, in the lamplit warmth of their room, Sarah felt nothing but peace. "I love you," she told Thomas. "Thank you for opening your door that night." "Thank you for falling through it," he replied. Emily yawned, perfectly content between her parents. In the morning, they'd dig out, help their unexpected guests to safety, return to the rhythms of ranch life. But tonight, on this anniversary of desperate chances and unexpected grace, they held each other close and listened to the storm sing its familiar song. Some circles, Sarah thought, were meant to come round again. Some storms brought more than destruction. They brought exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it most. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they brought you home. The photographer adjusted his camera one more time, studying the family arranged on the porch of the McKay ranch. "Just a little closer together," he instructed. "Perfect. Now everyone look here and smile." Sarah adjusted baby James on her hip, while Thomas held 3-year-old Margaret steady on his shoulders. Emily, now 5.5, stood between her parents, one hand on her mother's very pregnant belly, beaming with the importance of being a big sister twice over. "Maggie, stop pulling Daddy's hair," Sarah said, trying not to laugh. "She's making—" "Antlers," Thomas explained, his voice full of patient amusement. "Apparently I'm a reindeer." "Reindeer don't come until Christmas, silly," Emily informed her sister, with 5-year-old authority. "It's only summer." The photographer clicked away, capturing the cheerful chaos of a growing family. Behind them, the ranch spread green and thriving. Expanded gardens, a new barn, additional pastures, with horses boarding from townfolks who'd taken to calling the McKay Ranch the place where miracles happen. "One more," the photographer said. "This time, everyone look at each other instead of the camera." They did. And in that moment, Thomas, gazing at Sarah with undiminished love, Sarah laughing at something Maggie whispered, Emily reaching up to tickle baby James, and the baby gurgling with delight. The photographer captured not just an image, but an entire story of redemption and joy. After the session, they retreated to the shade of the porch. The photographer, packing up his equipment, paused at the door. "Beautiful family," he said. "How long have you folks been married?" 6 years this February, Thomas answered, helping Maggie down from his shoulders. "Feels like forever," Sarah added, then softened it with a smile. "The good kind of forever." Emily, ever helpful, piped up, "Mama and Daddy got married right after I was born, in a snowstorm." The photographer smiled at the child's enthusiasm and departed, leaving the family to their afternoon routine. Sarah settled into the porch swing to nurse James, while Thomas pushed the girls on the tire swing he'd hung from the old oak. "Higher, Daddy!" Maggie shrieked, her auburn curls, so like her namesakes in the old photos, flying in the breeze. "Any higher, and you'll fly away," Thomas warned, but gave another push anyway. Sarah watched her family with contentment bordering on amazement. The woman who'd arrived here desperate and alone bore little resemblance to who she'd become. Mother of 3, soon to be 4, respected member of the community, partner in a thriving ranch operation. The changes weren't just in her. Thomas had transformed from hermit to pillar of the community, serving on the school board and organizing the annual barn dance that had become a county tradition. He coached Emily's little league team, led 4-H meetings, and had even started a program pairing troubled teens with ranch work. "Mama, look!" Emily called, jumping from the swing at its highest point, landing in a crouch like Thomas had taught her. "I'm brave like you." "Very brave," Sarah agreed, though her heart skipped at the daredevil move. "Now help your sister down gently." Emily did, with the careful attention she showed all her younger siblings. She'd appointed herself family helper the day Maggie was born and took the role seriously. "Story time," Emily suggested hopefully. "After chores," Thomas said. "Gardens need watering, eggs need collecting." "I'll help," both girls chorused. They trooped off together, Thomas carrying the watering cans, girls skipping alongside. Sarah heard him beginning their favorite made-up story about the magic snow princess who saved the lonely mountain king, a tale that had evolved over the years, but always began with a terrible storm and always ended with happily ever after. James finished nursing and dozed against Sarah's shoulder. She rubbed his back, marveling at the solidity of this life they'd built. The cabin had been expanded. A second story added for the growing family, a proper office for the ranch business, a mudroom for all the boots that now lined up by the door. The phone rang inside, and Sarah answered one-handed, baby still sleeping on her shoulder. "McKay Ranch," Sarah speaking. "Sarah, it's Maria Chen. Well, Maria Roberts now. I hope you remember me?" "Maria, of course I remember. How are you? How's little Carl Jr.? "Not so little anymore. He's 5. Can you believe it? Listen, I know this is presumptuous, but I'm pregnant again, and I was wondering, could we come for a visit? Carl Jr. keeps asking about the nice people who helped when he was born, and I'd love for him to meet you all properly." "We'd love that," Sarah said warmly. "Fair warning, though, Thomas has sworn off delivering any more babies. Says 2 is his lifetime limit." Maria laughed. "I promised to stay unpregnant during our visit. You and Thomas gave us so much more than help that night. You gave us hope, showed us what a real partnership looks like. Carl and I are better together because of your example." After they'd made plans for the visit, Sarah hung up and walked to the window. In the garden, Thomas was showing Maggie how to pick tomatoes while Emily carefully collected eggs in her basket. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden, like a benediction. The baby stirred, and Sarah patted his back. "Your daddy saved us all," she whispered to James. "Opened his door to a stranger, and ended up opening his heart to a whole new life." But that wasn't quite right, she realized. They'd saved each other. Stormy night by stormy night, careful day by careful day, building trust and love from the ashes of their separate griefs. Thomas looked up, caught her watching, and blew her a kiss. Emily waved enthusiastically, while Maggie attempted a cartwheel among the tomato plants. Sarah laughed, waving back. In a few months, another baby would join their chaos. Another little. Life to teach about gardens and horses, about community and kindness, about how sometimes the worst storms brought the best gifts. The portrait photographer had asked them to look at each other instead of the camera, and Sarah understood why. The real picture wasn't in their faces, but in the spaces between, the love that connected them, the trust that sustained them, the joy that multiplied with each passing season. "Home," she said to James, who blinked sleepily at her. "We're home." And they were in every way that mattered. The McKay ranch, once a refuge for one broken man, had become a haven for a family forged by storm and strengthened by love. The circle that had begun with Sarah collapsing at Thomas's door had widened to encompass children and community, hope and healing. Outside, her family worked and played in the garden Thomas had once thought he'd never plant again. Inside, Sarah stood in the cabin that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. Between past and future, loss and hope, they'd built something beautiful and lasting. The storm that had brought them together was just a memory now, a story told on winter nights, but its gifts, love, family, belonging, those would last forever. And in the golden light of a summer evening, with her children's laughter floating on the breeze and her husband's strong presence anchoring them all, Sarah knew that some storms were actually blessings in disguise. She'd walked through winter to find her spring, and here, in this place of second chances and unexpected grace, she'd discovered that home wasn't just a shelter from the storm. It was the people who opened their doors and hearts when you needed them most. The McKay Ranch stood ready for whatever weather might come, its doors open to those who needed shelter, its family proof that love could bloom in the most unlikely ground. And somewhere in the summer evening, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, as if nature itself celebrated the beauty of lives redeemed and love restored.